Hi, I'm Adam Spencer, and welcome to Day One, the podcast that spotlights Australian startups, founders, and the organizations that empower Australian entrepreneurship. We go back to the beginning to tell the story of Australia's most inspiring founders and how they built their companies. You're listening to a special interview series as part of a documentary W2D1 is producing about the history of the Australian startup ecosystem. This episode was conducted by guest host Will Tjo.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Australian Startup Series interview. Our guest today is Peter Tippett. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you very much for asking me to join.
So could you tell us a bit about yourself and what you're currently working on?
I've been building startups since the late 70s when I wrote my first software on a computerized lathe. I moved to Australia from New Zealand in 1995 with my company then, and really started getting involved in the Australian startup scene after leaving Legal about 2008. We built our first Australian-based startup, which we took global with live TV engagement. And I left that in 2014, did another startup in 2015, and then moved north to Newcastle just over 3 years ago. A bit of variety of activity.
You've been an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur at that, for about 5 decades now. And so you've seen the start of the whole ecosystem. What has it been like, and how has it evolved?
Well, would you believe I built my first computer when I was 17? Would you believe it was 1 megahertz processor with 128 bytes of memory
Wow.
and a hexadecimal keypad? I wrote my first commercial software on the Apple II. And that's when I first learned the experience of IP theft, where company says they'll sell it, and then 3 months later they come out, oh, we can't sell it. Then 3 months later they came out with their own version, and about 70% was my code.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've been through what they call the Web 1, Web 2, and I'm actually in the process, would you believe, of building a Web 3 business right now.
Wow. Every single one.
Yep.
Was it difficult creating software back then, launching your own products? Because you mentioned there was a business that took your software. Was there much support structures around you?
There was nothing. I was in New Zealand. I was building software for companies, and I actually even built my own accounting software company, which I started in 87. And that's why I came across there in 95 with it. That business today is still in business. I left that in 2000 due to different experiences, but back then you weren't called a startup. You were just a business.
Just a small business.
Just a small business. I wrote like a web server to my accounting software in 96 and came runner-up in the Channel 9 Software Awards, but that was all the only accolade you could get. And everything was bootstrapped.
Yeah. When would you say that things started to kick off and what we had some semblance of a community start to rise?
When I left Legal 2008 and joined the startup, it was based around the 80-20 rule as a public unlisted company. So they raised some money from non-sophisticated investors. And that was an experience to see how that worked, but I wouldn't do it again. We ended up with 180 shareholders, and managing shareholders is a nightmare, especially when things don't go well, because at the GFC hit about 5 months after raising the money.
Yeah.
But out of that came our live TV engagement, which we took global. People have seen it on the cricket for about 6 years as the viewer's verdict, where the commentator asked the TV audience what they thought. And we had clients like UFC, Disney, NBC, Red Bull, Fox Sports using our software around the world.
Oh.
It was all started by us actually getting on a plane 2010 in August. We flew to Boston to meet the chief marketing officer of UFC. We pulled out the iPad and say, here's your TV screen. Gave him the phone and said, tell us who's going to win the fight. And basically did it. We switched it around, try it yourself. And that was on an iPhone 3. 2 minutes later, he says, can you put it on our next event in Indianapolis in 4 weeks' time? We went, yeah, no trouble. Walked out the door and went, oh, God. We hadn't even put it on a TV screen yet. We delivered that 1 month later and had it working.
Wow.
And that idea started back, would you believe, only in April 2010. So 2010, April, we started it. We're on air with UFC in September.
Wow.
6 months later, we were in Brazil with Miss USA doing 65,000 votes a second.
Yeah.
On Amazon and hammering that away as our first real test of what we developed. But we raised most of our money offshore after that. We raised, I think, about $18 million.
Why was that? Why did you go offshore? Was it just a lack of capital in Australia?
Lack of capital. The market was only just starting here, and we had connections into Silicon Valley. But a lot of our money actually came out of Canada because it was the TV executives and the TV investors that were backing us at that point. Basically, and I was part of TIE as well in Australia, which is an entrepreneurial network, and we were doing mentoring and helping other startups. In those early days, it was young, there was no structure yet, and there was the level of experience. What we see today is we're basically on that third cycle of experience.
Yeah.
But back then, there was no real founders. And as Nicky Blackbird can tell you, raising a fund at that time it took him a year.
Yeah.
And basically, when we dealt with offshore, like we did one deal, would you believe, in 15 minutes for $1.5 million.
Wow.
And it was in our bank account 7 days later.
Why is that the case? I mean, it seems that Australia seems to lag behind the rest of the world. I've heard some guests say between 10 to 15 years. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. There are some here that take a chance and go with it, are moving quick. It's just the difference of volume of capital. Like Airtree's announcement yesterday for $35 million for Web3. Well, in the last 4 weeks, $7 billion US has been allocated to Web3 projects as funding.
Yeah.
It's just the scale difference. And basically, we're only on second generation founders. We haven't even hit third generation founders. Where you got to think in the US, they're on like 10th cycle. It's just experience and the willingness, but also the amount of capital.
Yeah. Do you think then it kind of roots towards like a cultural problem? Australian founders and investors just don't have the risk appetite.
Yeah, I was doing the raising for this business last year. We had a couple of people put money in. And then when we went back and says, this is where we're going with Web3, with NFTs, basically only one of them wanted to come in. The other ones go, no, I don't get it. I don't want to play in that world yet. And to the point, our pitch deck has actually been structured so it's orientated just for the people who understand Web3. If you're not into Web3, we won't even talk to you now because we spend all our time educating you. But I've seen this before. I saw it at the start of the cloud in 2008 with all the ups and downs, all the furfies going on. And that business IPO could never have happened without the cloud.
Yeah.
And that's what I see right now. It's just the Web3 is amazing, going 4 times faster than the start of cloud did.
Yeah. And Australian, I guess, investors and founders just haven't kept up with that speed.
Well, basically, like I've been like listening to presentations from Jason Canelalis, his insider, where he had VCs pitching to you. And like he's done that. And the VCs in the US are actually pitching to investors now to say what they can do for them. Where Australia, like a number of VCs or investors, angel investors, say, well, a very different attitude. And it's very interesting.